Hi everyone, this is Q and I'm recording some kind of basic introduction video for ICMIZER with someone who has never seen it before, so it should be interesting for other new guys who are just curious about how to use software and about its basic features. Okay, so first of all I'll cover supported scenarios of actual situation on the table, because it's not so intuitive what kind of scenarios are supported. Traditional scenarios include like pushes, open pushes, when nobody has bet and hero is the first to act. So everybody folds to hero under the gun. For example, in this case, we can see that there are no bets except small blind and big blind. So this is like the most basic scenario. In this case, we have a number of ranges here for players who are sitting behind, because everybody before hero folded, so ranges strings are next to players. So what exactly do those mean? First column is the most important column. So here is what happens when hero pushes, and we have to specify what exactly our opponent is going to call us with. So those ranges are for calls against hero push.
Could you explain what is the difference between this one, and this one here?
Yeah, of course. Idea is that when hero pushes, first potential caller is button, so he is the first one to call. Next, if he folds, this is how this column works. If this guy calls, then those rangers are not used anymore. So here we have situation. If we push, this guy button calls 5.4% range. This is next to him. If he folds, small blind can call with this respective range. If small blind folds, then it's for big blind. As you can see, we have used assigned Nash ranges, and it has assigned a little, like, everybody gets a little bit wider here. Since we have 15 blinds, nobody can be so wide, but because, for example, for button to call, he's afraid that he will get overcalled by those players, so he has to be more tight.
Wait, so you're saying you're using the assign Nash ranges right now? Is that automatic?
Yes, I have used this just to make it more visual. For example, the bigger the blinds, for example, here I have set up blinds to 150 level, and we have only 10 blinds, right? So in this case, everybody will be calling us wider. It was 7.1 before, now we can check that it would be different, a little wider, 11, stuff like that. So this first...
Nash ranges means everyone's playing in equilibrium, right?
Yeah, well, this is the approximation for Nash ranges. You can't say that this is clear Nash solution. This is something which is very close to Nash. When everybody tries to play semi-perfectly, and perfect in this case would be that they try to take zero edges where possible. Usually taking zero edge doesn't make a lot of sense in real game. For example, if big blind in this case would be calling with zero edge, like when fold and push have same equity, he would be making basically a mistake, because he doesn't really want to bust quickly. He would be more interested in staying in a tournament and taking future hands where he can have a lot of equity. So
wait, so if we click calculate, if we were to change this hand and make it from the perspective of the big blind, clearly it would say he should be folding the bottom percentage of that 11%, right? He shouldn't be calling with that.
Yeah, well, we can see what happens. We have set up the Nash ranges, right? Now we can see what exactly it suggests us to push in this case. It shows 26%. Notice that it's not really important what kind of payout we are using right now, because I'm generally showing how it should be used for your specific situation's payout. So we can see that it suggests that zero edge would be this kind of range. We can then look at this situation from big blind perspective and see what's going on. For this, we put ourselves on big blind position and emulate that cutoff player has pushed. For this, we click this fold button and choose all-in decision, right? So you can see that it shows that he pushed 1,500 chips, and we are now facing his push from a big blind position. There is only one range in this case, because nobody can act after this spot, so just one range which you have to put in. We put in this range which it had calculated, and we can see that it suggests those hands. Well, you can see in this case the range is pretty powerful. When you're speaking about top 11, top 13% ranges, they are very powerful. Usually we don't include a lot of hands which are very close to zero. So missing 0.4, this is like smallest edge which we could potentially miss here, would be most likely a mistake. But if
Wait, say that part again. Say that part again.
Yeah, idea is that when we call, we don't really, well, this one looks like we don't want to call with this kind of plus EV, right? Because in this case it's clearly, if we call, there is a big chance that we go out of tournament. For example, even if we are 56% favorites, there is like 44%, but we go bust. So we don't really want to take that, because next hands we can be pushing and gaining a lot of equity. So this hand is good candidate to fold, and this one is a clear candidate. You don't want to take this risk. And in more, like in less strict situations, if somebody is pushing wider, for example, there will be more hands with closer to small, like to zero equity. So you would be thinking, when you call, generally a suggested idea is to take a bigger edge minimum than when you push. Because when you call...
Hold on for 1 second. Is the edge something that I remembered hearing back when I used Sit and Go Wizard? Is that the same thing as the minimum EV difference right there?
Yes, that's a different name for the same thing. Idea is that we use this value to cut hands which we don't like for some reason. In this case, we can choose some kind of like difference. You can see the idea is that it shows the result is plus 0.56%. And that's how exactly is that calculated. It calculates EV of push, that's 15.69, and EV of fold, that's 15.13. We subtract that and get this value. There is no magic or something specific about it. A lot of people miss the concept. It's pretty simple. Just the difference.
So the 15% is the EV of the push, and the 15.13 is EV of fold. But is that 15% of the total prize pool? What is that 15%?
Yes, in this case we are always speaking about total prize pool, so that's pretty important. You can see that we have 6 players and everybody has equal stacks, right? So if we divide 100% by 6, we get 16.6 or something, right? Here, when we fold, we lose 150 chips. So our EV of folding is smaller than our EV at the start. So it takes that in consideration. EV of fold is our ICM EV of a stack, which would be, if we fold, we would be left with 1,350 chips. So this is the EV of those chips. And if we push, it would be different. And we can see actual details about how exactly...
Oh, I see what you're saying. So you're saying those chips, those 1,350 chips, if you fold, are worth 15.13% of the prize pool. But if you get it in, you're only going to be getting back a little bit more than 1,350 in chips, right? On average. That's what it's saying.
Yes, idea is that it's also very important. But in this case, you don't really need to be making more than 150 chips. Since if you fold, you lose 150 chips. What would be great for you if you actually get 100 chips back. You don't really need to beat this. So anything better than fold would be a good result. We can see more clearly if we go in chip mode. In this case, you can see very clearly, like if you fold is 1,350 chips. And if you push, your expectation would be 1,524 chips. And you can see, yeah, but this is
That's a lot.
Yeah, so the difference is pretty big, but
that's
here...
almost 175 chips.
No, that's almost 175 chips.
Wait, so this is the same hand range and it's 175 chips?
Yeah, you can see the value, the difference is shown here. We are using chip EV now, so it would be like using usual pot odds. Well, we are facing pretty wide push, 44% hands, and we have a pair. Like even threes are good, even deuces are good, so you can see. But this is positive, so we clearly make a call. And even if we are only making like slightly better than
fold, what did you just change there?
I'm just selecting a hand here.
Oh, okay. Oh.
You can see.
Wait, was that what you were doing in the beginning when you first switched it to chip EV?
No. When I just switched to chip EV, I didn't change hand. Once.
So what?
Okay, so you can see here we are selecting the hand. So right now we have 3 selected. So it shows 174 chips difference in this case scenario. We can check detail. How exactly is this number, like how do we get this value, 1524? For this, you click this show detail button and you see actual percentage which are taken into account. So if cutoff wins, we end up with 0 chips. So that's like 0 chips with 49.88 probability. If we tie, which is very rare here, when you have threes, tie probability is only 1%. You get back 1,500 chips plus a little bit of small blind, so you get more than where you start. And if we actually win, this is the number breakdown. Does it make sense?
So for threes, our profit should be very small.
Well, it's hard to say what is small. In this case, it's pretty large. For example, if you're making one blind in one hand, when you only have 10 blinds, that's a pretty big profit. That's 10% of your stack, so more than 10 actually.
Right.
So
hold on for a second. Click the show details for 3 one more time, please. So it shows that our probability of winning is only 0.87% greater than our probability of losing?
Yeah, basically when you have a pair against a reasonably tight range which contains mostly over cards, like in this case we have 44% range, which doesn't have a lot of deuces. Only hands which freeze have 66% against are like ace deuce, king deuce hands. Against almost all kinds of other hands it only has like 53% or something. So in this case, this is the actual values. You can check that with Poker Stove, it would be the same.
So what I'm confused about is how can we possibly be profiting 175 chips when we're not even a favorite in the hand?
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean. That's a good question. Idea is that when we actually go in the hand, we are playing with our entire stack, 1,500 chips. So the pot would be like 3,000 chips plus small blind, right? Like 3,075 chips.
Exactly.
Then we have a part of that as our expectation. With threes, we have 49% of that. So I can run simple math here. We take this 3,075 chips and multiply that. Our expectation is 49% we get entire, and 1% we get half of that. So basically we can multiply this on 0.5. And this is what we actually get back.
So that would mean we're profiting 37.5 chips.
Well, let's run math very precise. We multiply how often do we get this size. This is what we get when we win, plus divided by 2 multiplied by, does it work? 0.11. Actually,
No, 0.0. 0.01, yeah.
Okay, so this is our value. And this is what we actually get. Well, a little bit we didn't take into account, but this is what we get. You can see, right? 1,524.
Oh.
So why it works? Because if we fold those 150 chips, they go away for nothing. So here, basically, we are competing for this pot. Part of the pot, which would be basically big blind plus small blind. So we take half of that, or we just fold and we lose our big blind. Does it make sense now?
Right, yeah, I'm pretty sure I understand now. So basically, the reason it's saying we profit 174, obviously, is that we otherwise lose that 150. So it's really only a profit of 24 chips if you consider those chips yours, but if you don't, because they're in the blind. Yeah,
this is an often misconception, that people consider those chips which are already out as yours. I am always trying to give idea that this is the wrong approach. For example, if you have a situation where you raise, for example, a very large part of your stack like this, and somebody pushes behind you like this, right? You cannot consider that you still have 1,500 chips, because if you fold, in this case, you are left with less than 200 chips. So your actual stack is 200 chips right now. So when you can consider decision, you really need to be taking into account that when you call, you are competing for part of 3,000 chips. So even if you have 7 deuce offsuit, an opponent has some kind of range, you are supposed to have around 30%, 25% equity of that, which would be around 750 chips. And if you fold, you only have 200 chips left. So it's easy to see that all hands would be profitable, even against pretty tight ranges. If you assume that those chips are yours, this kind of math wouldn't be working because it would show that you can actually fold some hands. But those chips aren't yours anymore, so ICMIZER uses your post actions stack as a reference point, which is the correct approach.
Okay, so one thing I should say then, right? If you fold and you only get 1350, if you go back to the hand we were looking at, you're only left with 1350, then that would mean to me that anything that leaves your stack at 1350 or greater than 1350 would be a better play than folding, right?
Yeah, that would be a better play than folding if your goal in this tournament would be to end this hand with maximum number of chips. But it's not a...
So how do you make it switch between what's the most profitable play and what's the most profitable play considering ICM?
Well, consider ICM, that's irrelevant. If tournament ends right now, for example, when you are, there is a very interesting type of tournaments, double or nothing,
Yeah,
50-50, right? On Poker Stars. What is the special about it? It's special that it ends immediately when there are only 5 players left. But actual prize distribution is done according to ICM formula. So in that case, if tournament ends immediately, you would take any option which would leave you with more chips than 1,350, right? Because if this was the last hand, you have 2 things to compare: 1,350 chips or something better. So even 1,355 chips would be better choice if tournament ends right now. But tournament doesn't end right now usually. It continues. So when we take into account that in future hands we would be able to push, to get better hands, etc. There are, for example, in this case, when there are 6 players and everybody has 10 blinds, we can expect at least, I don't know, 30 hands in the future, right? And each of those hands has some plus EV for you. If there are worse players at the table, there will be chances to take a lot of chips from them.
Exactly.
So you don't want to take the risk of ending tournament with probability of 49% or basically 50%, stopping it immediately only to win small number of chips. So when you call, you usually want to be taking a pretty serious plus EV decision. Because
so how do you determine what's the minimum edge you want to have on a hand? How do you determine
Yeah,
that?
that's a correct question, but that's basically something which can't be easily put into formula. This is something you need to be working on, but what I'm trying to say is that when you're pushing, you definitely can use a smaller minimum EV difference when you're calling. This is the general rule of thumb. But
because you have fold equity.
Yeah, because you have big fold equity, and there is a big part of your EV is coming from chance when everybody folds and you just move on in tournament. When you call, all your EV is coming from the situation where you actually win the hand, which is always a bigger risk than just pushing.
Right. Okay, so let's just throw out a hypothetical there. Say we're in the beginning of a either 9 max or 6 max sit and go. What's the kind of minimum EV difference that you would want to be putting in that kind of a stage of a tournament? Or I guess you don't really do it in the beginning of a 6 or 9 max one.
Well, if it's just beginning of 6 max, then blinds aren't really so high. But actually, this kind of scenario can be, it's real, that the game was going on, but somehow everybody still has this kind of stacks. In this case, it's really some kind of difficult, like where skill comes from. ICMIZER is just a tool, but you should be like making this decision in your specific case, like as a player, and it's really hard to give like pure answer on that. But what I can say is that, for example, if we have like 6 max tournament with this kind of payout, like on PokerStars, 65% for the first place and 35% for the second, I probably wouldn't fold anything bigger than 0.5% ever because that's just a very big part of, like, big sum of money. We can use
Really?
yeah, because that's
How is
0.5.
that a big sum of money? It's 0.4% of the prize pool.
Yeah, but 0.4% of total prize pool, not what exactly you paid, but let me run them off and you will see how it is. You can use dollar payout if you choose this, and you can, for example, if you're playing $30 game, let's say prize pool would be 180, right? And we can see how much you are making in this hand. We didn't take into rake into account just for simplicity, but you can see it's $1. So you make $1 in one hand potentially. If you're playing $30 game, $1 would be 3% ROI. So this is huge amount for one hand.
What's the rake in a $30 game?
Well, depending on if it's hyper turbo, but we are actually analyzing some kind of turbo. In hypers it would be, I think, 3%, around 3%. But you can
So
see.
that would be $1.
Yeah, $1, it may look small, but this is just one hand. If you have subsequent hands, you would be making a lot. So this could be
Wait,
used.
so hold on for a second. Hold on. If your EV is only plus $1 and the rake is $1, then that doesn't seem like a good play. It sounds like you're breaking even there.
Well, supposedly tournament, when you win, tournament continues. That gives you bigger stack. And this hand where you made $1 is added to your total which you make in this tournament. If you lose, then you add nothing. If you win, you add $1 and continue with a bigger stack. So that's your potential future profits, because, well, you know, but if you have bigger stack, generally ICM suggests that everybody folds to you, they respect you, and once you obtain bigger stack, chips start to flow to your way. So sometimes even a smaller edge would be beneficial if you could use it in the future hands. But here, you should understand that if it's 3% rake, some people are playing with break even, like 0 ROI, but they are still playing because they have rake back. So here, if we make $1, that would be 3% ROI in one hand. So you can't miss that, like in 2012, for any reasons. But you could think about this value, because $0.3 is actually only 0.3 ROI.
So why is 3% such a great edge when that's the amount of rake, though? That doesn't make any sense to me. Just because of the implied.
Well, imagine if you make those like 3 calls like that in a row. You make call 1, call 2, and every time you make $1. So you made $3 in 3 hands. So you have 10% ROI in tournament in only 3 hands, and there are more hands where you're also making money. You should understand that, for example, your ROI is coming from entire tournament. If your expectation for like sit and go, I would be speaking about 6 maxes, but it's just for like simplicity. In 6 max you can expect, for example, 2% ROI, let's say, right? And let's say that average duration of tournament is 60 hands or something. So that would mean that in each hand you are making, like, you divide 3% ROI by 60 and you get some kind of value which you get. But you also need to subtract rake first. So you take 3% ROI, you subtract rake, that would be actual 6% ROI before rake. So you divide 6% by 60 hands, and you get $0.1 per hand, right? So that's your, like, some simplistic average expectation. So as you can see, here we are making 10 times more than that.
But you don't play every hand, right?
Well, you don't play every hand, but you can approximate that every hand is playing a part in your total profit in a single tournament.
Okay.
So this is like some way to get idea of what kind of values you should be using as those differences, minimal differences. How long does a tournament last? What kind of ROI you're expecting? What kind of rake you're paying? This could give idea. For example, as rules of thumb, when you're pushing, you can take pretty small edges, like when you push, in this case you can take, let's go back to percent. You can take as small as 0.2, 0.13. They all make very good sense, because actual chance that you get called is pretty small. You can see that here. You can see bust probability when you push. Like if you push and get called, you lose, and in that case there is 15% that you go bust. So in 85% cases you continue in the tournament. So in 85% cases you make some additional money, no risk. Imagine if you had like 100% chance of folding. In that case, it would make sense to take this kind of hand, right? Because you just add some value to your stack with no risk, right? Does it make sense?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so if you have 100% of chance of folding, you take any kind of edge which is plus, right? But usually that's not the case. So you adjust a little bit. But the smaller chance of going bust, the smaller difference you can prefer. The bigger chance, as if when you call, the bigger difference you want. So that's the basic idea of applying those percentages. And actual percentages, they depend highly on your actual structure. Because if you're playing multi-table tournament, percents of prize pool are completely different. If you would be seeing some kind of 0.44% of total prize pool in MTT, that would represent huge amount of money. That would be potentially several players' initial stacks. If it was like 200 players, this value would be one stack, right? Like 0.5% would represent one of 200's total chips in tournament. So when you choose multi-table tournaments, generally it is suggested that you use 0 and go from there. For example, if we use payout for 180 mans, we don't adjust stacks because it's not so important. Let's say everybody on the final table, 6 players left, and they happen to have equal stacks, and everybody has 10 blinds. So
how do you let it know that it's the final table, by the way?
Well, you let it know as it's final table. Default analysis is final table. So if you use this kind of structure and you have 6 players, it is like default approach or representation of final table. If you don't want a final table, in this case you can see that there are only 6 players left,
right?
And the structure is multi-table.
Mm-hmm.
So it means that we are dealing with those top 6 payouts and the rest have been paid. So if you want to view situation as a multi-table tournament which is still running and there are additional tables, you need to switch this switch to multi-table tournaments and enter total number of chips in the tournament and remaining number of players. So here we have 9,000 chips and total is shown as 27,000. So if we say that there are 18 players, average stacks would be all like, we can check how it would distribute stacks. We can see stacks are pretty close to ours, basically. It randomly distributes stacks, so we now are analyzing situation in multi-table tournament. But generally, let's stay simple right now, so I show basic ideas. You understand now that if we have 6 players and nothing else is presented, this is basically the only smart way to interpret this situation would be to view it as final table. And that's how we use it. 6 players left, this kind of payout is used. So what I'm saying is that in this case we have completely different values for hands. Only 3 hundredths of percent, but this is 0.03% of total prize pool of 180 players. So that's much bigger.
So wouldn't it perhaps be a better way to look at it as a percent of your buy-in? In other words, a better way to compare the two?
Not really. That's just going to complicate things, and that's currently not possible.
Okay. But you see how like there's a big difference between 0.03% edge in an 180 man than a 0.03% edge in a 6 man, right? Big difference.
Yes. Idea is that if we use dollars here, you would see what I'm talking about. So if we have 180 players and everybody paid $30, that would be a pretty big prize pool of 5,400 chips dollars. So when we run this math, this is $1.73, right? And when we remember our buying, that would be $30. This would represent a pretty healthy part of that buying,
Yeah,
right?
2%.
A big value. But
No, it would be more than 2%.
even more. Well,
2 divided by 30 would be 1 over 15.
we check. It is 5.7%.
Yeah, 5.7%.
So that's when we look at our initial buying initial stack. But when we look at total like percents here, that's only small part because the total price pool is so large. So making it. So idea is that when you're analyzing multi-table tournament spots,
you want the minimum EV difference to be a lot lower in a multi-table.
Yeah, generally suggested is to use just 0, because anything better than 0 is usually worth it for you, and this gives you a good initial point as a beginner.
So if you just want to tell it, show me anything that's plus EV, you just click the output and change it to chip EV, right?
No, that would be using chip EV calculations. Here we are using ICM calculation, taking into account actual payout. Because
so what would change if we switched that
to
chip EV?
Simple rule is that whenever you switched from ICM using any kind of payout to chip EV, you always get wider ranges. So you can see that right now ace-9 is negative, ace-8 is negative, ace-8 suited is negative. A lot of hands are negative. If we switch to chip EV, they all will become positive, and even more. Well, here you need to understand that actual sign isn't so important, because if you're only making like one chip, that's not really a big difference between losing one chip, but it becomes green and plus. But you can see that there is huge difference. Even if we take some kind of reasonable minimum difference, we still wind up with a much wider range than when you use ICM-based structure.
What the ICM pay structure is saying is that having 100 more chips is not very useful in that payout structure, but staying in the tournament is more useful than having 100 chips. That's basically what you're saying.
Yes, basically that's the whole idea about ICM. When there are 6 players left and payouts are increasing, if you clash against another player, often only players benefiting from that are other players, but 2 of you guys. Like those 4 guys who are just sitting there and staring at you are paying nothing, and they are facing a great opportunity to move up in payouts. So because of that, usual pot odds are completely useless in those spots. So you need to take that into account, and that's what ICM does.
So say we were to change this from 18 players to 60 players, would that change everything?
Well...
No, not change the 180 man, but change how many players are remaining.
Yeah, that would change everything, yes, but it would make things, I think, it's not so easy to predict what's happening, but I think it would make it a little bit wider. So let's see. Let's make it more real. 120. So everybody would have the same stack as ours. So average stack would be like this. There are 60 players left, and average stack is the same as ours, right? So there are 10 tables running. We can see what's going on. Remember, we had only 7.1% before. Now, well, if we take like 0 edge, there are much more hands. This is because we are pretty far from money still. What's going on? We are only 18 places are paid, and there are 60 players left. So we are pretty far from money. So ICM isn't so strict yet. We are willing to take more risks. We are willing to go all in, take chips. And if we go bust...
before we had the EV difference at 0 as well? When we were looking at it with 18 players?
I think no, but let's see again. 18 players, and we had 27. This is how it looks. So you can see there are our push range becomes tighter, even though we didn't change any opponent ranges. So this is the idea. ICM is always, whenever tournament starts, ICM is immediately applied. You are never playing directly in chip EV in tournament. that can be used as some kind of reference point, some kind of simplification of actual situation. But it is wrong, because there is always, when you go bust, everybody values increases, so you don't want to go bust. It's not cash game. So when ICM is the most strict, ICM, implications making everybody very tight and not willing to call is when we are actually on the bubble. If we take this to bubble spot, for example, it would mean that there are 19 players remaining in 180 men. That would be 19 players remaining, and we put like average stack would be same as ours. This is like just sample scenario. It's not important that total chip sum isn't actually 270,000 chips as it is. It's just not important. Important things are here: stack sizes relative to blinds, so everybody has 10 blind stacks, and ICM and number of players. ICM meaning what payout we are using. Payout is basically defining ICM implications. So let's see what's going on. You can see it's even more tight now. This is the most tight situation. Everybody's calling pretty tight, but you can't really push wide here.
So say there's a big stack on the table, or it doesn't really matter, he's a big stack. Say there's a bully, right? And he shoves, put us in the big blind, and say the small blind shoves, and we're deciding what can we call here on the bubble of a 180 man. I'm just curious.
This is very like interesting scenario, and I'll show that the difference is huge when you take bubble effect away. For example, let's see what happens if he pushes 100%. He pushes 100%, and we can call 24%. This is on the bubble. Let's see what happens when there are 18 players, so we are actually in the money. Against the same range.
We could probably call 50% is my guess.
Yeah, basically you're right. We can now be much wider with our call. We are now free. We can continue playing. Because before it was like starvation. Everybody's afraid. Nothing is going on. Because you
so
don't.
The reason we can only call 50% and not 98% is that we want to be ahead of his 100%. I don't get it. Why do you think we can't call like 90%? If he's shoving 100%, aren't we ahead of that range?
Well, if he's showing 100%, in order to be ahead, we need to be using a tighter range. For example, if you want to see what kind of range would be winning in cheap EV, you can see that 66%. So hands outside of 66 are basically non-profitable against 100% range.
Oh, I didn't know. That's an interesting phenomenon. So say he's shoving, let's change it to 75% and see how does our range change?
Oh yeah, let's do it. Basically, you can see this chart which shows what's going on against certain push. You can see this chart works like this. If opponent pushes, here is opponent range. If he pushes 100%, we call 66%. We saw that, right? If he pushes 75%, we call 48%. This call graph usually has a shape of triangle with basically the same angle.
So what's the ratio of what he shoves to what we call?
Yeah, actually you can see the ratio. Ratio is like 2/3 of his range. You can see 100, we call 66. If he pushes 50, we call 32. Well, it becomes a little bit like that, but you can see that the angle is the same, so it keeps the ratio. But
okay, so it's not 2/3 always.
No, it's never like in this spot it's close to 2/3. You can use it as rule of thumb for this specific situation. But problem is you never face this kind of specific situation, so you can't remember. But what we can see is that if you actually get back to ICM and check the same chart, you can see that now ratio becomes pretty sick. You can see against 100% you only call 30%. So it's actually.
And this is when we're not in the bubble.
This one is. Yeah, this is just final table scenario. If we switch to bubble scenario, it would be even worse. But no, not so much worse, but...
So he's shoving 75% or 76, what can we call?
In this case, we call, well, with zero edge, we call 20%. So that's like...
Wow.
Mm, well, basically, this is the bread and butter of multi-table tournaments. Idea is that you can push very liberally, like choose wide ranges, if your opponents are playing correct. Problems begin when they start to be aggressive and bored, tired of your pushing around, and they start to make mistakes. In this case, they make a mistake, they make wider call, it's negative for them, they decrease their expectation, but another player who is suffering is you. Because now everybody is benefiting except two of you, and that's not what you want. So that is something to keep in mind. When you're pushing in players who are not aware of this effect, they can make wrong call, make a negative decision, but actual player suffering would be you. And everybody else would be glad, like checking out who goes busts. And
Hey, I'm just curious, when you minimum cash in this 180 man, what, how many times your buy-in do they give you? Do they give you 2 times your buy-in, 3 times your buy-in? Do you know?
well, let's calculate. It's 1.2% of total prize pool, and the actual buying percent is basically a little bit more than 2 buy-ins.
Okay, that's like a typical tournament as
Yeah,
well.
like a typical tournament. For example, when you're analyzing multi-table tournaments, you don't really need to use specific multi-table tournament structure. Often, you can get a lot of ideas by using this default 180-man structure, or I don't know, 90-man when there are 12 payouts.
Okay, so let's just stick with this PS 180 man for a second. Say, let's pretend that we're on the bubble of a tournament similar to a bubble of a Singo, and we're now facing a shove from 100%, and we said we could only call with, was it 50%? Change his range to 100% really quick?
Uh-huh. What else
'Cause
should be changed once I missed? Like we changed to Chippy V again, or
oh, do
not?
we have to change it to Chippy V on a tournament?
No. I'm asking what would you want
I
to?
just want to imitate, say I'm on the bubble of a tournament, because this happens all the time, and I'm
Uh-huh.
trying to decide, well, can I call, what hands can I call with if I know he's shoving pretty much any two?
Uh-huh.
He's a big stack on the bubble, he's probably going to shove any two because he knows I can't call.
Yeah.
So what hands can I call with in that spot?
Well, those are the hands we can call with, and like I say, we are ready to take pretty small edge decisions, so 0.006 probably makes sense, but maybe 0.02, maybe you fold those. But you can
Wow,
see, not,
that's a pretty wide calling range. I was thinking you could only call with like ace 10 plus and like ace 8, maybe ace 10 suited plus.
well,
And
this is like, this is something you can think about and like get your own idea. You need to understand that, yes, it's positive, but if you go busts, tournament ends. And if you don't go bust, you can continue playing, you can push, you can get a lot of value. So probably you should be tighter than just taking all green hands and just
so we
calling.
probably want to change the EV difference to like,
Yeah, this is something which I am not really able to say with confidence what should you be doing, because there are different approaches. Some say that applying ICM is simply wrong and you should be always taking cheap decisions in multi-table tournaments, but I think those players are really wrong, because ICM is applied in tournaments, so you shouldn't be ignoring it if you have ability to take it into account. But there are some ideas, let's say that you may want to keep bigger stack, to try to get bigger stack if you feel that later you would be able to use it to your power. And it's very hard to estimate what exactly happens if you win this hand and then continue playing with double stack, pressure in the table, how much that would be worth in future, like how many hands you would be able to bully your opponents, add to your stack, and it's not so easy to figure out. That's something, I guess, which is homework.
so hold on for a sec. Hold on for a sec. Let's just take a look at that ace 5 off. Let's say he's shoving any two. How much are we profiting in tournament chips when we call that?
Okay, in tournament chips, let's see. We are making a lot of chips, you can see.
Oh,
380 chips.
That's a lot.
Yeah, that's huge amount of chips. That's basically...
When we plugged in ICM, it's basically saying that you need to make at least 381 chips, or this is not a good play with ICM considerations.
Yeah, ICM considerations in this case are very strict. You can see if we try to see how is it worth like in dollars, like this, that's $3, so that's actually 1/10 of our initial buying. So as we saw with chips, it was more than 1/4 of our initial buying, and with dollars, that's like.
I'm actually surprised that it still says to call with ace-5 because say we're on the bubble, right, and we can either fold and make $60,
Mhm.
or we can call and take a chance at doubling up, but on average we're only making $3 on the play.
Mhm.
I'd rather fold than take the guaranteed $60. You know what I mean?
Yes, I know what you mean, and this is something like I say. You take those numbers, but you don't need to jump to decisions quickly. You can think about numbers. You can think with your own minimum EV differences, like what kind of risk you are willing to take, why, and then take a educated decision with your
So how
play.
does ICMIZER make up its mind that 380 chips is the amount we need to make for this to be a break-even decision or slightly profitable decision? How does it choose that 380 chips, that was how much it was in chip EV? How
It
is the
doesn't
right amount?
choose. I'm sorry, I don't understand the question because it doesn't choose. It just calculates how it runs. Like I say, simple stuff. When we fold, you know what happens. We just continue playing with 1,350 chips. When we call, we take, like we are taking pretty good hand against random hand. Ace-5 is a good hand, right? So we can see that we win in 55% of cases. Sometimes we split. So basically we have 57% equity. So we take
With
57.
ace-5?
Yeah, with ace-5 we have 57% equity against random range. So if you just take this cheap EV situation, of course you are willing to take 57% of 3,000 pot, which happens to be 1,730 chips.
Right. That's what I remembered it saying. So my question was, that ace-5 off, that was the sweet spot hand when we looked at the minimum EV difference 0 under ICM.
Yeah, under
Remember?
ICM. That's yes,
So
I know.
how is it choosing that or it looks like ace-3 off is the sweet spot where it becomes profitable under ICM. How does it determine that
This
you
is
need
the
at least
full ball.
57% equity to make it a good call, or break-even call, or profitable call?
Well, let's look again
Oh, what did you
at
just
detail.
change?
Oh, I got back to bubble spot because in this spot we are not on the bubble, so we can call wider. You can see, right? This is normal final table with 6 players, and here we are now on the bubble with 19 players.
Oh, you
So,
switched it. Okay.
so this is the difference.
Yeah, let's
So,
just keep
so
it there.
let me show you what's going on. We can check the details for ace-5 and how it works. Like we can see, if we win, our EV is 8.93% of total prize pool. This value is calculated using special ICM formula for multi-table tournaments. It's taken into account stacks distribution and a payout, and as a result of that, you get this value. So that's how you get this EV push 5.19 value. You multiply 8.93 by 55%, tie 551 by this small percent, add up those, and you get this value. This is ICM is figuring out those values. Then it's simply multiplying probabilities, and you get actual final result. So this is it. And when we take into account chips, that's basically the same, but math becomes simpler. When we win, we have 33% of chips, right? When we lose, we have 0 chips. When we tie, we have 16.67% chips, the same as we had before. So when we multiply those, we get 19.23. So this is how it works. Does it make sense? Or
I didn't follow the last part about 1923. What was that?
Uh-huh.
Could you show that tab again?
Yeah, you can see it.
What is
We,
this?
we multiply 33.33 by, 1 second.
Where did the 33 come from, though?
This is our EV when we win. This is, if we win, we will have 3,000 chips, and that would represent 33% of total chips of 9,000. So this is EV of
Oh,
our win scenario. And we win
this
with
is a
50.
6 max. This is a 6 max one.
Yeah, this is the 6 max kind of spot when we just calculated with chip EV. So to get this 19% chips value expectation, we just multiply 33.33 by 55 and add up 16.67 multiplied by 4%. That would be this value. And when you multiply 19.23 by 9,000 chips, you get this value. And this is what you can see here.
I see what you're saying.
This is our expectation for chips. But for ICM, it uses formula which calculates outcome EV, and when it runs the same math, it multiplies those values by outcome probability, and you get actual EV. And when it takes into account fold EV, you subtract that, and you get the value. Does it make sense now?
Yeah.
But it's a little bit complex. Maybe if you run around, look at those numbers, think a little bit about it for a couple of days. I don't know. It would become more clear what's going on and why
So
is it like
let's
that.
switch this. Let's switch the situation here. Let's put it back to the bubble really quick.
Hmm.
Say we're even stacked on the bubble.
Yeah, this is the scenario.
And say now we're the one in the big, or we're the one in the small blind, and we're deciding what can we shove on the big blind, assuming he's calling with a equilibrium strategy, or what would, I don't know what he would be calling, but
Well, let's say he's calling what we are suggested to call. Like, for example, if we push like this, let's say that he calls with all hands which are 0, right? So this is 24% range. We take this range and copy it for his call range. In this case, we run calculation and we can see that we can't push very wide.
wow.
Yeah, this is like surprising, etc. But this is all connected to very strict situation we are currently in the tournament. In this case, there is non-linear effect from his call range increase. For example, if he calls us 15%, like here, you can see this chart shows what happens if he calls us 15%. We can push 100% of hands. But if he slightly increases his call range, our push range decreases pretty quickly. You can see he increases his range by 10%, and we push, our push drops by 66% from 100 to 33% of hands.
Wow.
So this is like non-linear effect, which is usually evident when you are in scenario of highly pressured ICM situation. If you check the same graph for chips, it would be not so strict. Although shape would stay the same, you don't really react so strictly like so to opponents' range adjustments. You can see here, of course, we can like push wider even if he calls pretty wide, like 25%, we can still push 100%. But if he starts to adjust his call range, we don't go below like 43%. We can still push, even if he's calling us 50%, we can push like this. So the shape is not so strict. But when ICM is applied, it becomes pretty dangerous, and you need to be making very correct guesses about your opponent calling frequencies, so you don't make actual minus of your push, as we saw.
Could we change the calling range really quick for a second? I wanna plug in,
Uh-huh.
just for my own sake, what I think most, say, fish and regs are calling on the bubble here. I think they're gonna call with like, let's say ace 8 off and better, and ace 8 suited and better, and then like pocket eights and better, and or
Something
maybe
like this, right?
get rid of the king jack suited, I think,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe pocket seven. I'm not sure. Let's just leave
Well,
pocket.
let's say it, just because it's very tight range, and the result would be that you
Okay,
can push any two, basically.
really.
You can see
Okay.
all hands are good, and with the, you know that with the 180 man payout, you know that those small values for 4 deuce offsuit, like 0.10, are very large values. So in
So
this case,
this is under ICM. We can shove
yeah,
anything.
under ICM, if he calls correctly, or usually using like, if you say this is usual range, then you can push very wide. But if he starts to increase a little bit, like for example from 13 to 15, or say 16, then you can see some hands become actually negative. And the effect is very quick. Like if we increase his range just a little bit, like for example making it 2 additional percent hands, you can see a lot of hands are becoming negative now, because here our plus EV is heavily coming from fold frequency. Whenever he calls, that's not good scenario for us. Actually, you can see that with 2% additional hands when he calls, we really aren't happy with that, so a lot of hands become negative.
Is
And
there
we,
any way we could account for the fact that there might be say this were, could we somehow make this seem like a tournament, like a nine-handed table, and put an ante in there? Because that's what's often the case. Is there any way we could do
okay, yeah,
that?
of course, let's do it. We do like, what kind of ante, like 150, 75, 15,
It's
right?
normally 10%, yeah.
Mhm. So we have this kind of scenario, 9 max, 19 players remaining, just different type of bubble with 9 max, right? Let's see.
Yeah, we just want to imitate what a tournament bubble is normally like.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. Let's see how, like in this case, initial pot size is much bigger, right? There is
Right.
basically almost additional big blind presence, so that makes our push, well, you can quickly see that it's wider than it was before against 21% range, because of that additional value enters bring. So let's see, if he calls like 27%, you can see there are some negative hands, but a lot are still profitable. So basically, if you're saying that your opponents are calling 12% in this spot, usually, you can see that all hands are profitable and that they are basically making pretty big mistake by calling so tight, because against like wide ranges, like we are.
Can I just do one thing really quick? Let's say he's pushing. I'm gonna try and imitate what I think the average reg is pushing. Let's say he's pushing 90% or something like that. Not shoving quite any two, but
Okay, let's see
90%.
90%, right?
Or that's pretty wide. Let's try 80
Okay,
80%. Yeah.
maybe
Let's see what
75,
that.
like,
Maybe 75. Yeah.
okay.
Let's see what happens.
So we have our like
Pocket fives and up.
22 response range. But keep in mind, this is like, ICMIZER is analyzing one single hand, and tournament isn't a one hand, it's sequence of hands where you try to make positive decisions and stay in the tournament. So that's something to keep in mind always.
So you're saying it might be not correct, even though.
No, it's correct for one tournament. For one